This episode of the Topcast is proudly supported by Alfred Music. You're listening to the Topcast, the original podcast for growth-minded instrumental music and voice teachers since 2015, with your host, Tim Topham. Our mission at Top Music is to empower instrumental music and voice teachers to find and nurture their innate creativity so that they can teach lessons that are innovative, integrated, and inspiring, and that will have a positive, lifelong impact on their students. Join us each week as we interview teachers and creators from around the world and unpack fun and exciting ideas to maximize your teaching and studio business success. Hello teachers, welcome back to the Topcast. It's great to be speaking to you again today. I hope you have been enjoying our recent shows, and definitely today I'm sure you'll enjoy our guest. We're talking all about creativity. You know, obviously that's core to my philosophy, principles, core to my heart when it comes to music teaching. And you know what? I have found a best buddy over in Germany, a UK-based teacher called Garreth Brooke, who's been creating some amazing blogs and resources over on his website. And the more I looked into what he was doing, I had to get him on the show to chat about it because we really are kindred spirits. And I know that you're going to hear ideas from Garreth that you're just going to be like, yeah, nodding your head along, I can tell. And I can't wait to share what he's doing so that you can go and explore some of those resources as well. Garreth Brooke is a British-German musician. He studied music at St Edmund Hall in the University of Oxford, where he acquired an MA, received the AMTB Performance Diploma from the Music Teachers Board, and holds teaching qualifications from the Royal Conservatory of Music. Garreth has released music with 1631 recordings, Thesis, Moderna, Blue Spiral, Nordic Euphony, and Big O and Twiggetti, and his music has been streamed millions of times. He's performed live all over Europe and has sheet music that has been published by Editions Musicoferum and Breikoff and Hartel. He has written guest posts on Piano DAO, music reviews for A Closer Listen, and his article about suicide prevention and mental health was published on Huffington Post in the UK. He comes to us live from Frankfurt in Germany. Welcome to the show, Garreth Brooke. So great to finally meet.
Yeah, it's really great. Thanks for having me on.
I am really passionate about this discussion today, as I feel we're kind of kindred spirits somehow, because when I read your blog posts and I watch your interviews, our thinking and approach is just so aligned. And so I've been really delighted to have found your work. Now, people listening, if they caught it, they'll probably hear that you had a UK accent, but you're actually in Germany now, I think. So tell us the story. How did you end up in Germany, and what's instrumental music education like over there?
So the story of me coming here is just falling in love, really. I met my then girlfriend, and I was a bit lost in my work, and she said, come move to Germany. And I thought about it for a while and did it. And it's been one of the best things I've ever done. It's really opened up so many doors for me.
Did you meet her in England, or were you traveling?
We met, we were both on holiday in Berlin, both visiting friends, and and we were both out clubbing, which is something we would never normally ever do. The idea that you could meet someone while clubbing is just completely foreign to me, but we really clicked, and it was
Is she German?
Yeah, she's German, yeah. You'd never know from her accent, because she's an amazing English speaker, but yeah.
Right, I was going to say, can you speak the language?
Yeah, I can speak it fairly well now. You know, you're always conscious of not being good enough, but I'm all right.
Yeah, good on you. And so what's teaching like over there? Is it kind of similar to the UK?
I mean, I can't really answer that authoritatively, but my feeling is that it's very different. I've taken some lessons with a teacher myself, and when I first moved over here, I spent a while researching it. And the thing that really struck me, the big thing, was that they just don't really do exams here. You've got your university entry exam, and before that, there's not much. And in the UK, we're so regimented and focused on, moving from one exam to the next. And that's how I grew up. So that was kind of liberating to find that out. And then the other thing that really struck me with my piano teacher was just how focused on Fingersätze, which is fingerings, he was. And that was kind of fascinating. And that's definitely changed the way I approach my playing a lot. Just really detailed markings of fingerings and thinking it through in an incredible detail. But I think more generally, the thing that's really struck me living here and from talking to friends from around the world is the cultural life here is amazing. There's so much going on. And I live in Frankfurt, which is a relatively prosperous city, and I could go and see a concert almost every night of the year, classical. I can go to the opera for about 14 euros. You get that includes your public transport ticket, which is quite remarkable. And even in the smaller cities, there's just a vast amount going on, and I think it's really amazing in that regard.
And do children go to private instructions after school to have their lessons? Is that kind of model something that happens there?
Yeah, I think there's a big, very sort of formal setup with music schools, and they run
like private music schools.
Yeah, private music schools. Yeah, and then there are instrumental teachers like me teaching completely privately. But I think it's probably about 50-50. It's an interesting place to be.
Yeah. And so you teach in German, I assume?
No, because Frankfurt's a very international city. There's a lot of expats here. So I've been very fortunate to be able to find lots of English speakers. And I teach in English, which is cool. Although it's not helped my German much.
No, that's true. How many students have you got?
I've got about 30. I'm actually cutting down a bit because my composing work and the writing work started to grow. So I'm trying to cut back on the teaching a little bit. So I'll probably be about 24 this year.
Okay, nice, because you're in summer holidays at the moment. So when you'll start again in September, is that right? Or August?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, great. Well, look, I'd love to learn a little bit more about your background and how you came to be doing this blogging. You've got the great domain, pianocreativity.com. I mean, straight out of my playbook. I love it. And you mentioned to me privately, though, that your mother's mental health challenges were related to your connection to music and something that kept you playing through your teenage years. So can you tell me a little bit of your story? And I know you said that you were happy to share this.
Yeah. I think it maybe come with a bit of a trigger warning because it is a little bit intense. I was a very sort of normal student, and I did my piano lessons regularly and very classical. I did all my ABRSM exams, and my mum was a wonderful mother when I was younger. And when I was about 14, she started experiencing very severe depression and anxiety. And I didn't really know what was going on. And she had attempted suicide in a fairly dramatic way. That just sort of came out of the blue for me. It really knocked me for six. And I think a lot of my teenage years, and actually my 20s as well, were really about just dealing with that. And the piano was a major way I coped with it. And I was very lucky to have a piano teacher who was very nice and supportive, and he'd show me a bit of improvisation. And just sort of, he didn't instruct me formally in it, he just sort of told me I could do it and then gave me a few ideas and sort of sent me off on my merry way. And I really loved it. And then at school, I had a music teacher, Mr. Wilson, who basically gave me free access to the practice rooms. And I spent hours in there. And a lot of the teachers were very kind, so they just sort of let me drop out of class and go and play the piano if I wanted to. And I spent a lot of time in there. And the piano was a place where I processed, really. I don't think I was doing it consciously, but it was what I was doing. And when I talk to people about difficult times that they're going through, I'm always struck by how valuable an ally the piano is, because it can take everything. It's such a, you can really put out your anger into it, but you can also express real sadness. It can express everything that you want to express. And I think it really saved me. And the fact that I'd started improvising and doing a little bit of composing at that stage gave me a direction that was sort of mine. I could make it mine and express what I wanted to. That's how I kept going with the piano, really, in my teens. And I think that's the thing that's been at the core of my teaching as an adult is, at least to begin with, this is an amazing thing to give to a child. It's an amazing thing because you give them so many useful skills, but you also give them a space where they can express themselves. And I try and meet my students where they are, wherever they are, whatever they're dealing with, and then help them figure that out. And we do it through music. Music is obviously the focus, but it's about helping them to deal with what they're doing and going through and helping them to become functional adults. And it's a real privilege to do that kind of work. And I'm carrying on what my teachers did for me. That's the most important thing.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm sure it will resonate with people who perhaps felt like that themselves, or have students who are struggling in their own way. It just reminds us, I think, even on those days when we're like, oh my goodness, just play that F sharp, don't forget it. And, like the things we have to do. Yeah, we are in an incredibly special situation and position with our kids.
I think one of the things that I really encourage people to do is when kids come into the room, really look at them and try and read their body language. And if they come in looking tired and down, you don't have to immediately go into the music. You can. Sometimes that can be the right thing to do, but sometimes they really value just you asking how they are and just taking the time to listen to whatever they say and not dismiss it. And I think that's a really valuable thing that we can do.
And be happy to throw out that lesson plan that you had in your mind as well and just go with where they're at 100%. And that's why I think some of these creative activities are perfect, because they can just take the pressure off students when they forget their books or they've had a bad day or whatever's happened. You can just do something completely different. And so that's why I love that we're both sharing these ideas. Of course, the other side of that is that being creative can freak some students out as well. So we have to keep that in mind too. There's a fine line we walk sometimes, but there's always ways of introducing creativity that doesn't need to stress people out. So let's talk about that for a moment, because it's one thing to teach in a creative way, but it's another whole thing to start a blog. And you've been blogging quite prolifically in the last few months. I can barely keep up. So what kind of changed? Why did you start doing that?
I think what happened was I was really enjoying my teaching and I was enjoying my composition work, and I was making a fairly decent living out of it. But I felt like there was something missing, and that was the sense of purpose. And I think when you're trying to figure out what you want to do with your life, you really need to understand your backstory. And I think that that experience with my teachers, Mr. Clifford and Mr. Wilson, sort of showing me what I could do was so formative. And when I talk to other piano teachers, so many of them have, like you said, with the students, but the teachers have it as well, the fear about improvising or composing and the self-doubt that they can do it. And I really wanted to show people that you can integrate it in your teaching very frequently and in small ways, and that it was accessible, and that you don't need to be able to write a classical form sonata in order to teach composition. You don't.
Or to know your B flat augmented 9 flat 3 chord.
Yeah. Like that's a useful thing to be aware of, but it's like any tool in your toolbox. You don't need all tools all the time. And most of the stuff that we're doing as creative teachers should be simple, because it needs to meet the student where they are. And when we give them too much stuff, we overwhelm them. The goal was to give people easy ways into teaching creativity in their lessons.
Yeah, and you just wanted to share what you had received yourself, I guess, so that other teachers could give that to their students. Yeah, very similar reason to why I started blogging back in the day as well. So another area I know that we're really aligned is our history. Looking back to Bach, Handel, and knowing that for all those composers, everything was creativity and improvising. That was their job. That was what they were paid to do. There was nothing else. There was nothing else. I remember Forrest Kinney talking about Bach. I don't know where he found this, because I've tried to find the quote, going for one of his job interviews or something, and out of the 15 things he had to do, 14 of them were all about improvising and making things up on the spot, because that was what was around. That was what they had to do in the day. And Forrest used to call it the creative paradigm or the creativity kind of paradigm. And we've shifted over time to the performer paradigm where we perform other people's works. And so I know you've talked about this in some of your blogs. I reckon Bach would be pretty shocked and maybe a bit disappointed to see where things have gone, particularly in those exam-based cultures. So what do you think about that whole thing?
I mean, you're preaching to the choir. I think we've really lost sight of how core that was to the people that we love and the people that we idolize. Yeah, Chopin and Liszt and Beethoven, they all did it. I don't know they did it daily, but it was a core part of what they did, you know? And the funny thing is that we tell stories about how amazing they are as composers, but we don't dare to do it ourselves. And I just find it funny in a sort of sad way. There's a lovely story of Beethoven getting involved in an improvisation competition, and this guy Steibelt, I think his name was, challenged him, and Steibelt improvises something, and it's quite nice, and then Beethoven flips it over and does it completely opposite, but he does it in a way that the audience understands it, and it's a magnificent triumph for him. And Steibelt flees. I think he flees Vienna in shame. And it's a bit absurd. It's a bit sort of toxic masculinity, maybe, but it's also like it's so illustrative of how kind of everyday that was. You know, all these composers could do it, and even composers who weren't famous names could do it. It was the daily bread. And I think it's one of those things where we've got their work thanks to notation. And so we've become very obsessed with notation. But if they were still alive today, they'd be improvising for us and creating for us live. And we'd see them doing that. And we'd be like, this is completely normal. Let's do more of what they're doing. So history sort of filtered us and made us behave in a certain way that's quite anachronistic, really.
And I think if the film Amadeus was anything to go by, didn't Mozart have a battle with, he had a bit of a nemesis, I can't remember the guy's name, there was another guy around at the time, Salieri, that made me think of that as well. I don't know how true that is.
There's just so many stories. There's Bach's son, one of his famous composer's sons was working at the court of Friedrich the Great in Prussia, and Bach takes a long journey to go to Berlin, and I think it's Berlin. No, it would have been... anyway, he goes to the court, and the king is a very accomplished musician, and he gives him this absolute nightmare of a musical theme which he's supposed to react to, and Bach, being Bach, is such a skilled improviser that he absolutely nails it, and that becomes the musical offering, which is quite a famous work. But he's just doing what everybody's doing, you know, like the king can improvise. That's what he does. He deliberately does something difficult for Bach. And what we've done is we've sort of idolized Bach so much and focused so much on the notation that we've forgotten that it was actually an act. It was the act of doing creativity and not just performing music.
Alfred Music's piano resources have long been favourites of piano teachers and students alike, with a vast catalogue of popular methods, supplemental repertoire, masterworks, pop and more. This fall, Alfred Music is excited to continue its legacy of producing first-class piano resources with the release of 4 brand new books. For video game-loving students, Sagaland, video game-inspired solos by Elizabeth Swift for intermediate students that is sure to spark the imagination and excite all of your students. Sand Paintings, 16 piano pieces by the amazing Connor Chi, inspired by traditional Navajo sand paintings. Take the Stage, recital showstoppers for young beginners by Angela Marshall, and Rare Recital Treasures, an anthology of lesser-known teaching pieces selected and edited by Ingrid Clarfield and Kevin Chance. Exclusively for Topcast listeners, go to alfred.com/podcast and use the code TOPMUSIC at checkout to save 30% on these titles and everything else at alfred.com. Go check it out. So does that mean that a lot of Bach's works might only have been heard as we hear them now once or twice. Like they would have changed over time, or he would have played them differently. I know Chopin would improvise and embellish all the time differently. Do we have a sense that Bach, I know you're not a music historian necessarily.
I'm not authoritative, but yeah, that's a good question. So certainly you can go back through Bach's notation and find many versions of a fugue, for example. And I was playing a fugue in G major where there are several versions of it, and you can sort of see his thought process evolving. I think he's not just an improviser. He is, I think he's a bit like me in the sense that his improvising is where he starts, but then when he's in the notation process, he's doing a lot of musical thinking then as well. And you almost need to have something fixed and written down so that you can think it through properly. But the genesis of it is improvisation. And improvisation and composition go hand in hand, and one can feed into the other, I think. And it's almost circular. The composition can then feed back into the improvisation.
As much as I love talking about this kind of history and where we've come from and where we're going and how we got here, and I talk about it in my book, which I've just seen on your shelf as well. So thank you for that. I can see my notebook beginner's book behind you. Nice little blue patch.
Yeah, there's the pile of books I need to review. It's growing bigger.
So we kind of touched on it before, but the other thing that I really enjoy about what you've been sharing is this idea of, I call it kind of repertoire remixing or mashing up. So taking repertoire that students are already learning and asking, okay, well, what can we do that's creative with this, that's not only fun, but that actually gives students a better understanding, a deeper understanding of the music that they're actually playing. And I get a sense that this is something that you're quite passionate about. This is the way you tend to work your creativity into lessons as well. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and I love your title, Repertoire Remixing. I think that's really good. I think part of our job as a teacher is to explain a piece. And I think the best way to do that is to take it apart and put it back together again, and maybe put it back together again in a slightly different way. And so I love taking a theoretical aspect of a piece or a technical aspect and then turning that into a little improvisation, and then seeing what the student does with it. And I think the crucial thing is that frequently you just have to get the student started and then they will run with it themselves. And this is just once you've established that they're comfortable with some kind of creativity, it's something you can do with anyone of any age. So it's really fun. And I think it really gives them a deeper knowledge of how a piece works. It gives them a greater respect for the composer that wrote it. It really helps with their theory because they're not doing theory in a dry way, but they're experiencing it in a practical way. They can feel it, they can see it. It's not just something on the page. And it's really invigorating. And again, it doesn't need to be a big part of the lesson. You can just do it as a kind of 2-minute activity. But it's amazing how frequently they'll come back to you the following week and they've had some other creative idea, and then you can react to that, and it's very stimulating, and it sort of it enables them to contribute to the lesson in a way that they might not otherwise do if you're just doing a straight performance lesson. And that's really good for them and their self-development and their sense of self-worth as well. So it can be really wonderful.
Yeah, it speaks to what I call integrated music teaching, where instead of sort of pigeonholing, okay, we're going to do some oral tests and theory and sight reading and all that, we try and bring it all together as part of the piece. And I think it also speaks to Paul Harris's simultaneous learning, which I'm sure you're familiar with, where it's all about what are the elements in it. Before you learn a piece, what are the elements? Let's pull them all apart. Let's play through, like explore them. Let's get creative with them. All of these approaches just speak to get a better way to instruct students in music rather than, okay, here's the next piece. Let's put it on the music stand. Okay, let's start learning the notes. I mean, that is just the worst way to teach a new piece of music. We got to try and engage them and give them some of the background and the pieces, the patterns, what makes this piece up, because that just sets them on a path of success right from the beginning.
It really does, and it's such a fun thing to do, and you can really stimulate their musical imagination. I was at a residential course a couple of weeks ago, and Andrew Eales, who runs Piano DAO, was running the pedagogical element, and he got us sitting around and he played a piece, didn't tell us anything about it, and then he asked us a bunch of questions, sort of, standard oral questions, and then he said, "What do you think this piece is called?" And immediately there's a sort of imaginative activity, and we understand the piece in a way. We've not looked at the notation, we've not touched the piano yet, but we've got it in our head, and that should be our real goal as teachers, I think, is to get people having music in their head. And that's what I mean. I inhaled your book. I read it in about 3 hours. That's what you're trying to do, isn't it? It's set the foundation for that, it's fun.
So you call your activities creative introductions, right, on your blog? Yeah. And you've got a number of these. And in fact, I just looked before we connected. You had one of Melanie Spanswick's pieces, and I just met her. She just came over for the Australian Piano Pedagogy Conference. So it's cool to finally meet her. But you've also done sort of Baroque pieces, a variety. So how do these work? What can teachers gain from looking at these?
So the idea is that it's fundamentally it's to sow the seed of creativity. It's not a definite method that you have to do every part of it, but it gives you a series of things that you can do when you're teaching some of this core repertoire. And I try and choose stuff that's on exam board syllabuses and in graded anthologies, so that it's really useful. And generally, I write a simple a teacher-student duet which is based on the scale and has some of the elements of the piece in it, so that the student gets used to creating in the key of, they get used to sight reading in the key of G major or whatever, and they refamiliarize themselves with the pattern of the scale in their fingers. And then the teacher accompaniment then becomes something that the student can use as a base for melodic improvisation. And that then will hopefully trigger them to do lots of other things, and to think about how the piece works. And then usually I'll try and incorporate some activity that's directly relevant to the piece. So, for example, I was doing, there's a Gigue by William Arnold, and in that one it's just full of sequences. So I'm like, well, here are a bunch of motifs that you can do sequences with. Have fun with that. Can you come up with your own sequence? Can you play it with different articulations? And can you shape the dynamics? And the idea is to give students an awareness that there's lots of different things that they can do with musical material, and that they can pick and choose their favorite. And also that they get a chance to play with the teacher. I think that ensemble playing is so important, particularly for piano students, because we spend so much time playing on our own. And I think it's a bit detrimental when you only play on your own. And I'm hoping I'm going to do more contemporary stuff over the course of the next few months. I've got a whole list of pieces I want to do. So I'm hoping there'll be some exciting things for people coming up. And I'm quite lucky because I know quite a lot of composers, so it's quite easy to get access to interesting pieces to share.
Yeah, that's great. So contemporary meaning living composers. We're not talking, fantastic. Yeah, I mean, it's just a great collection to have up your sleeve. And I've really enjoyed looking through them and gone, yes, that's exactly what I would do. It's just brilliant, Garreth. So I'm so glad you're doing this and sharing it.
I just really want teachers who feel like they don't know how to do it to have an easy resource that they can use, and that they can just try out, and they can just use the bits that they like as well. I don't want to be dogmatic about it. I don't really want to write a method book. I just want to, this is an Arabesque by Bergman. It's a great piece. This is what you can do with it. And then they can run with it,
And lots of those pieces, teachers will be super familiar with because they've taught them lots and lots of times. So it's a great opportunity to just refresh our own teaching and, you know, avoid us getting stale as teachers and just waiting for, you know, that forgotten E flat and, you know, all that kind of stuff. You know, that if you're at that stage in your teaching, you need to jump on Garreth's site and try out some of these activities. Now, as we wrap up, I know you have some strong opinions about how exam boards could modernize and help students and teachers kind of return to some of the 1700s way of doing things, which is kind of a backwards thing for me to say, but you get what I mean. What were your thoughts there? And I know this could be the subject of a whole podcast, but interested to hear.
I mean, I think fundamentally, I grew up in the exam system and I do think it works fairly well, but I think it's very performance focused and not sufficiently creativity focused. And I think sometimes it feels like it doesn't quite align with the skills that musicians need today. So one of the big things I think that's missing is the ability to, or is an examination of your skill as someone who can understand lead sheets and use lead sheets. That's so fundamental for a working musician nowadays. And it just doesn't really feature on any of the major exam syllabuses, as far as I know.
Well, unless you go to something like Rock School, which is a different system, but that's not one, I guess, that all that many teachers would use.
Correct me if I'm wrong, though, but I think with Rock School, you've often got an arrangement of the piece. You haven't got a lead sheet. I'm not really up to date with Rock School.
No, you're right. Yes, they're written arrangements, but they do have the chord symbols, I guess, which is one step in the right direction. But again, not every teacher would teach like that.
No. And there's another exam board out there called Maestro Online, which is very new, and they have a similar kind of idea to Rock School in that you're given an arrangement, but you're encouraged to write your own introduction and outro and do an improvisation and, make changes that you feel are appropriate. And I think that is really useful for any kind of pop arrangement. And I think when the major exam boards include pop arrangements, they really need to be allowing students to make creative changes that help the students to align with the original intention of the composer. And the original intention of the composer is not generally expressed in the piano arrangement because it's an arrangement. And there are many different ways that you can arrange a song on the piano, and the one version that's in the exam book isn't necessarily going to be the best one. And so they should be allowed to change it if the rhythm's slightly wrong. Sometimes they frequently simplify rhythms, so why not play the rhythm wrong in inverted commas, but actually the right way? Or if the chords are too simple or the patterns are not exciting enough, then they can elaborate those. And I really think students should be encouraged to do that. I also just generally think that the theory exam that some of the exam boards have needs tweaking to make it more hands-on and more practical. I really wish we'd move away from the idea of we haven't moved away from the idea of a written exam, but we've replaced it with an online checkbox exam a lot of the time. and I just don't think that's not useful, and it's not fun. I mean, I really hated my theory exams as a child. I felt like they were completely just irrelevant.
They were so disconnected, weren't they? Because you would stop learning at the instrument and you'd go and sit at a table with a book and write stuff without even... I mean, I did endless exercises and 4-part harmonies and stuff, and I never even played them or had to listen to them or write a melody, all those things. I mean, it's just silly, isn't it?
It's kind of sad because you can teach this stuff in a practical way and people will have fun. I've got an adult student who, slightly to my surprise, loves doing Bach chorales. I give her a melody and she will harmonize them. She does it. She's asking me for more every week. And I'm like, well, fine. And that's you learn so much doing that. And it's very different to how I did it as a child. It's different to how I did it at university. And I think there's an enormous opportunity. And I think it'll really excite people in with classical music as well. I often think like one of the most fun things to do is to write a canon. I love the Royal College of Music, the Royal Conservatory of Music, the Canadian exam board. In their first 2 levels, they have some canons, and they're really fun. And I really love teaching those. And sometimes I'll give them to a student, but with only 1 line, and then I'll say, right, you finish the rest of it. And that's really fun. You've got to be careful about who you give it to. Obviously, you can't give it to a complete beginner, but it's remarkable how kids really love that kind of stuff. They lap it up.
Well, it's exploratory and imaginative and yeah.
And it's hands-on. I think, like we spend too much time with either a gadget or a pencil in our hand. And I think actually creating music is where it's at.
Well, Garreth, it's been so great to finally connect with you and just talk creative shop. I love it. And I really want to encourage people to go and explore your resources. So where should people go? Where can they find you?
The website's pianocreativity.com. It's a Substack, really. So the way it works is that it's more like a mailing list, but you can view everything on the website without being a subscriber. It's completely free. And on that website, I review resources that I like, including your book at some point soon. And I talk about how to teach cool repertoire in interesting ways. And I also occasionally interview people. I had a really amazing interview. Yeah, there's this amazing Austrian professor called Karen Schlimp, who's so experienced, and she's got some really interesting ideas. And pianocreativity.com.
It's great. And I love that the interviews, you're finding people from Europe in particular who don't normally get much airtime in American, Australian, UK circles. So that was really wonderful to hear from her and to hear, all this stuff is going on everywhere. It's just great to bring people together and to spread the word. So congratulations and thank you for all that you're doing. Thanks for coming on the show, Garreth. It was great to have you.
Thanks so much, Tim. Yeah, it's been great.
Well, I really hope you go and explore Garreth's resources. As he said, they are all free, available on his website. Go and explore them, try them out. I'm sure you'll find some of his creative introductions for pieces that you regularly teach. Even if you think you're teaching them incredibly well, try something new. You never know what you might learn from exploring what he's been putting together. Now, over on the Piano Podcast this week, we've got episode number 30, Marketing Your Teaching Studio with Kelly Riordan. Just search for the Top Music Piano Podcast wherever you're listening to this show. Well, that's the end of the show for this week. Thanks again for joining me. Next week on the show, we're going to be meeting our Top Music Sheets composer for September, the one and only Susan Staples Bell. I know many of you will absolutely be enthralled by her music and love it already, and I'm so excited that she's joining us as one of our contributing composers for Top Music Sheets. This is so good. I'm Tim Topham, and you've been listening to the Topcast. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'll speak to you again this time next week. How do you keep up to date with all the latest trends and research into music education? How do you connect with other teachers around the world and make sure your teaching stays fresh and relevant for students of all ages and stages, both now and into the future? I created our Top Music Pro membership to be the one-stop shop for music teaching resources, training, support and community, and I'd love for you to come and join us inside. With over 40 comprehensive training courses, hundreds of teaching demonstrations and lesson plans, free monthly sheet music, discounts, and all the business and pedagogy support you could ever need, Top Music Pro is the community you've been looking for. If you're ready to level up your learning from the podcast and join thousands of other teachers in our global network, head over to topmusicpro.com today. If you enjoy this show and want to hear more of our work, be sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening today. For links and resources mentioned in this episode, visit us at topmusic.co/podcast or check out the show notes. I'm Tim Topham. Thank you so much for listening. Enjoy your week ahead, and I'll catch you next time.